What is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? Story 1. A few years ago, I was walking through the woods, slightly off the beaten track, when I noticed a really overpowering sweet smell. Out of curiosity, I pulled back some undergrowth to investigate and stumbled upon a dead body. The man had clearly been there for quite some time and wasn't in good condition, swollen, discolored, and decomposing, with parts of his body reduced to runny remains. The local wildlife had clearly been feasting on him for days. I immediately called the police, who instructed me to stay with the body until they arrived. Since I was in the middle of nowhere, it took them a long time to get there. By the time they arrived, it had already gotten dark, and I ended up sitting alone in the dark with the body for what felt like an eternity. Later, I found out he had taken his own life. For a long time after that day, I had recurring dreams about him. In the dreams, he would talk to me, and his words were far from kind. He was angry, claiming I had disturbed his resting place, and he repeatedly urged me to end my own life. I told myself it was just my imagination, but at the time, it was extremely unsettling. Even now, he occasionally appears in my dreams. Writing this story tonight, I wouldn't be surprised if he shows up again. Story 2. About 2 years ago, I was driving home from a family reunion late at night. The drive was about 2 hours long, and I had to leave that night because I needed to be at work the next morning. Most of the drive took me through roads lined with dense bushes and trees, the kind of eerie roads you see in horror movies. I had been driving for about 45 minutes when I started feeling really tired, almost out of nowhere. I knew I wasn't going to last much longer behind the wheel, but I couldn't find anywhere safe to pull over and rest. Eventually, out of desperation, I pulled over onto the grass by the side of the road, hiding my car behind some bushes to make it less visible. I noted the time, 11:22 p.m., before reclining my seat and falling asleep. Sometime later, I was jolted awake by a scratching sound. Groggy, I glanced at the clock. It was 11:50 p.m. The noise stopped after a few seconds, and since I was still extremely tired, I didn't bother investigating. I drifted back to sleep. At 12:40 a.m., I was woken up again by the same sound, but this time it didn't stop. My heart raced as I considered the possibility that it might just be an animal inspecting the car. But why would it come back nearly an hour later? Nervously, I glanced in my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of something darting into the forest. My imagination ran wild, and I couldn't shake the thought of urban legends, like the infamous hook killer who scratched up cars and attacked anyone who got out to investigate. Panicked, I decided to get out of there. As I drove down the road, I came around a bend no more than 100 yards away and saw a car parked on the roadside, its driver's side door wide open. I slowed down, curious, and looked inside. It was empty. I glanced in my rearview mirror again, and that's when I saw him. A man came sprinting around the corner, screaming at me. Hey, you! Get out of your car, now!" he shouted. Terrified, I hit the gas and sped away. I never looked back and never saw the man again. The moral of the story? Never sleep on the side of a deserted road. Story 3. A few summers ago, I went for a midnight bike ride with a friend. At the end of the evening, we went our separate ways, and I had just about 2 blocks left to ride home by myself. Because of some construction, I had to ride on the sidewalk. The streets were completely empty, so it wasn't an issue until I was about to turn onto my street. That's when I noticed a man walking by himself. He looked to be in his 40s, a bit scruffy but not homeless. The sidewalk was narrow and I didn't want to startle him, so when I was about 6 feet behind him, I called out, "Hey, behind you!" He turned around and gave me this incredibly angry glare. I turned onto my street, but then I heard him start following me, screaming at the top of his lungs. He was yelling obscenities, calling me horrible names and threatening to kill me. I didn't want him to figure out where I lived, so instead of going home, I decided to loop around the block. But here's the scary part. When I looped back around and looked down my street, I saw him standing on my front stoop. He was just standing there staring out at the street, as if he somehow knew that was my house. He spotted me as I rode by again, but this time he didn't say a word. Terrified, I went back to my friend's house instead. 2 days later, my bike was stolen from the alleyway by my house. Story 4. When I was very young, my parents were amazing and let me sleep in the living room on weekend nights. My sister was a light sleeper, so this arrangement let me stay up until dawn watching TV. Most of the time, though, I'd eventually pass out on the couch. One night, I woke up suddenly with this prickly feeling like something was wrong. I bolted upright and instinctively stared out the front window. We lived in rural Georgia, surrounded by trees as far as the eye could see. In the perfect moonlight, I saw the silhouette of someone sitting in one of the trees. Our family dog immediately ran to the window, snarling and barking like crazy. Terrified, I raced to my parents' bedroom to tell them what I saw. My dad grabbed something to defend himself and rushed outside with the dogs. I stayed trembling in my mom's arms, waiting for him to come back. When Dad returned, he said he didn't see anyone and told me to go back to bed. Shaken, I decided to sleep in my bedroom instead of the living room. I explained everything to my sister as we lay in our room. Meanwhile, Dad kept walking around the house, keeping an eye out while sipping a cup of coffee. I finally started to relax, thinking it was over. But then I saw him, the same man standing outside my bedroom window. In the moonlight, I could make out his face as he raised a finger to his lips in a shush gesture before turning and running straight into the trees. I couldn't stop crying. I don't know how long I cried, but it felt like hours. That night still haunts me. Story 5. My house is set farther back on the lot compared to most others, and the layout is pretty unusual. The sidewalk runs the entire length of the living room and ends at the front porch, which leads directly into the living room. Large windows dominate the space, providing great natural light, but zero privacy since they don't open or have coverings. While the rest of my family was on vacation, I had the house to myself. I decided to take full advantage and got absolutely smashed. At around 9, I passed out on the couch in the living room, too scared to walk back to my room. The couch is positioned directly beneath the big windows. I woke up suddenly for no apparent reason, but I was overwhelmed by a severe case of the chills. I couldn't figure out why, but then I heard it, the banging. It was coming from directly above me. I froze, but I opened my eyes enough to glance up at the window. Someone was standing there, pounding on the glass. I stayed completely still, paralyzed with fear. I glanced at the cable box. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The banging continued relentlessly, then all of a sudden it stopped. I stayed frozen, but the silence was short-lived. The banging started again, this time from 2 directions. Someone was pounding on the window above me, and another person was pounding on the front door. They kept at it for what felt like an eternity, at least 40 minutes. Finally, it stopped, but I didn't move for the rest of the night. The next morning, I called a friend, asking if he could stay with me for the rest of the week. His response? "What the F for? So that we can both be murdered in our sleep?" Thanks a lot, asshole. Story 6. I was 17 and had just gotten my driver's license. Back in high school, my friends and I made it our mission to find abandoned houses to throw parties in. We found a few decent options, but the holy grail was this house I passed every day on my way home from work. It was an unfinished shell of a massive home, complete with a large property in the back. I told one of my friends about it, and one day before we headed to a movie, I decided to show him the house. It was around dusk in the summer, so I had my headlights on. We pulled up in front of the house and stopped for no more than 10 seconds before heading back to the main road. Just a minute later, a big truck appeared behind us with its high beams on and started tailgating us. My friend and I noticed but didn't think much of it as we headed toward the main road. At the intersection, I turned right, but the truck cut through a gas station and blocked us off. A massive man got out of the truck, and my friend and I were absolutely terrified. He walked up to my window and knocked on it. Shaking, I rolled it down. Now here's the freaky part. The road we were on was usually busy, but somehow there wasn't a single car in sight. The man asked us what we were doing at the house. Thinking fast, I lied and said we had just made a U-turn. He stared at us for what felt like an eternity, then smiled and said, "All right, you can go." To this day, the house remains unfinished. I'm convinced it's being used for some kind of illegal operation. Story 7. When I was about 10 years old, all my cousins and siblings were over at our house, around 10 of us altogether. The adults, including our parents and grandparents, had gone out for dinner, leaving us kids at home. We were sitting in the living room watching movies, when suddenly the entire house shook. A blinding flash of light lit up the backyard. It felt like a bomb had dropped. The sound, the vibrations, and the bright flash all happened at once, terrifying us. Without thinking, we bolted as a group into the hallway. The older cousins debated calling the police, but decided instead to call the parents. After a few minutes of calming down, we gathered enough courage to venture back into the living room, armed with makeshift weapons, just in case. We waited for about half an hour, but nothing else happened. When the parents got home, we frantically told them what happened. but they thought we were just imagining things. They checked the backyard, and everything looked completely normal. None of the neighbors reported seeing or hearing anything either. Even now, 10 years later, we still talk about that night, trying to figure out what could have caused it. To this day, it remains the scariest experience of my life. Story 8. This happened to me last summer when I was staying at my parents' house during the holidays. It was around 3 a.m., and I was in my room on my computer when I got a call from my sister. That alone was strange, considering her room is just down the hallway from mine. If she needed me, she could have easily just walked over. I went to pick up the call, but it ended before I could answer. Figuring she must have wanted something, I got up and went to her room. As soon as I reached her door, I heard her scream that someone was in the room with her. Without hesitation, I burst in, but there was no one there. Once she calmed down enough to speak, she told me she had woken up to see a dark shadow just centimeters from her face. That's when she screamed. I told her that she had called me, but she swore that her phone wasn't even in her room. Sure enough, when we checked, her phone was downstairs in her purse. The strangest part? I had the call logged on my phone, but her phone didn't show any record of it. To this day, I haven't been able to explain what happened. Story 9. I was delivering a hot tub to a contractor realtor in a fancy gated community near Branson, Missouri. The house was located on a steep hill, so the fourth floor, the delivery location, was ground level at the driveway, while the other 3 floors were below on the hillside. When I arrived, the construction workers were responsible for guiding me to where the hot tub needed to go. To get it onto the 4th floor balcony, I had to create a ramp, take it from the driveway down into the yard, up another ramp to the porch, through the living room, and finally out the back patio doors onto the deck. Here's the catch. The deck wasn't finished. A huge portion of it was missing, and there were no railings. They had only installed enough decking for me to get the hot tub from the patio doors to the far corner where it was supposed to sit. This made things incredibly risky because the hot tub weighed 900 pounds, and if I fell, it would have been a 4-story drop. The construction workers offered to help, so we carefully moved the hot tub out onto the deck. We crossed the narrow strip of installed decking and reached the corner. At this point, the tub was still standing on its edge, strapped to a dolly. Normally, laying it down is easy. I've done it thousands of times. But because the deck wasn't finished, the contractor insisted we leave the hot tub standing upright. Removing the dolly while the tub is upright is tricky because the dolly is supporting the full weight of the tub. I explained that we need to use blocks to prop up one side, tilt the tub slightly, pop the straps, and then carefully remove the dolly. Afterward, we tilt the tub back, remove the blocks, and set it down safely. The problem? The deck wasn't wide enough to allow me to do this safely. I had to stand with my heels just 4 inches from the edge of the deck, with nothing but open air and a 4-story drop behind me. Everything was going fine, until it wasn't. I popped the straps, we tilted the tub, and the workers freed one side of the dolly. But to release the other side, the tub had to be leaned further toward me. I told everyone to freeze while I adjusted my footing. My heels were now hanging off the edge of the deck. I was on edge, literally, but things were still under control until one of the construction workers got impatient and kicked the corner of the tub to dislodge it from the dolly. The move worked for him, but not for me. I wasn't ready and I lost my balance. I shouted that I was falling, and though the workers beside me grabbed the tub's weight, no one could reach me. My arms windmilled as I leaned backward, staring at the jagged boulders below. I felt myself slipping. My heels gave out, and I was falling. Then out of nowhere, I was jerked forward, slamming into the bottom of the tub. I was dazed but alive. The dolly was removed, and the hot tub stood upright with me clinging to it. It turned out that the worker who had been uselessly playing with the strap had already secured one end to the house. When I fell, the strap was behind me, hanging off the deck. He'd pulled it tight with all his strength, stopping my fall and saving my life. To thank him, I sent him, his wife, and his child on an all-expenses-paid Christmas vacation to Breckenridge, Colorado. It was actually a trip I'd been saving to surprise my wife and daughter with, but after what he did, I felt he deserved it more. My family never even knew about the trip I'd planned. That was, without a doubt, one of the scariest moments of my life. Story 10. This isn't a supernatural story, but it's one of the most disturbing and surreal experiences of my life. A few years ago, early one morning, I was walking to my bus stop while eating a banana. It was dark and misty, around 5 a.m., and my mind was preoccupied with trivial things, like whether I wanted my daily Starbucks before or after the commute. As I approached a dimly lit corner near my street, a tall man wearing a black mask stepped out of the dark alleyway to my left. Still sleepy and disoriented, I barely registered him. Then he shouted, "Put down your purse," and pointed a gun to my head. That's when it clicked. The man yelled again, "Put down your bags." I raised my hands trying to stay calm and said, Okay, I'm putting them down over here." Then he ordered me to walk toward him and get down on the ground. My heart was racing, but I agreed, saying, "I'm coming, okay." My hands were sticky from the banana I'd been eating, and I knew I needed to find a way out of this. For some reason, I couldn't stop talking. "Look, see, I'm on the ground. My stuff is over there. Please just take my stuff." That only made him angrier. "Shut the F up, okay?" he screamed. He got on top of me, pressing the gun to my head. Now here's something important. I was on my way to coach a high school practice, so I was dressed in baggy pants, a hat, and a jacket. I looked more like a teenager than an adult woman. But when he got on top of me, I could feel the moment it dawned on him that I was female. He paused, got off me, and then pointed to the alleyway. "Come with me." My stomach dropped. I remembered hearing about recent assaults in the area, and my inner voice screamed, "There's no way you're going down there without a fight." But the rational part of me argued, "He has a gun, you idiot." "Follow me," he yelled again. So I did what I do best. I talked. "I'm coming, I'm following you," I said. He made a crucial mistake. He believed me. I took 2 small steps backward toward the sidewalk. He turned his body and the gun toward the alley. That was my chance. I tucked my head down in case he started shooting and sprinted as fast as I could, screaming at the top of my lungs. I didn't even realize I was screaming until I heard my own voice. After running 6 or 7 blocks, I finally made it back to my apartment. I didn't stop to check if he'd followed me. I just locked the door and stayed inside. The police searched the alley an hour later, but the man was long gone. The only evidence left was my banana peel, discarded and browning in the alley. The experience haunted me for weeks, and to this day, I still wonder about all the what-ifs. But I'm grateful it's the what-ifs that haunt me, not the what-dids. Story 11. A week after I got my CPR certification, I had to perform it for real, on a woman who was likely overdosing on heroin, maybe other drugs too. I was at a thrift store with friends looking for Halloween costumes when someone rushed in and said there was a person passed out in the parking lot. I was in the dressing room when the store went eerily silent. I stepped out, told everyone I was certified in CPR, and said they needed to call 911. When I went outside, I didn't see anyone lying on the ground. Someone shouted that the person was in a car parked far out by itself. I ran over, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The woman inside was slumped against her car window, her face completely blue. She had dark circles around her eyes, what they call druggie rings, and even those were a bluish hue because she was so oxygen deprived. We opened the car door, and I'll never forget the sight. Tears were streaming down her face even though she was barely alive. We turned her head to check for a pulse, and when we didn't find one, we pulled her out of the car and started CPR. An ambulance arrived about a minute later, and they quickly took over. Another ambulance showed up, and soon there were 6 EMTs surrounding her. One of the cops told us they had administered naloxone, the drug that can reverse heroin overdoses, but he said it likely wouldn't work in her case. She was too far gone. They continued CPR while transporting her to the hospital, but it didn't look hopeful. I'll never forget the mess inside her car: heroin needles, empty pill bottles, a child's car seat, and toys scattered on the floor. She wasn't very old, and it broke my heart to think she might have had kids. I still think about her sometimes, especially the tears on her face. That moment will stay with me forever. Story 12. My mom told me this story not too long ago, but it happened about 10 years ago. When my cousin was 17 or 18 years old, she was in a car accident and tragically passed away a couple of weeks later in the hospital. She was very close to my dad's sister, our aunt, and often babysat her kids, who were no older than 4 at the time. At the time of her death, my aunt's house was under construction, and the renovations continued after she passed. One day while my aunt was at work, she received a call from one of the construction workers. He complained about a teenage girl who kept showing up at the house, walking around the construction site. This had been happening on and off for weeks. Curious, my aunt asked for a description of the girl to see if she recognized her from the neighborhood. The worker described her as having long brown hair, wearing a red baseball cap, denim overalls, and a white jacket. My aunt froze. The description perfectly matched my cousin, the same cousin who had passed away weeks earlier. When she got home, my aunt showed the workers a photo of my cousin. Every single one of them agreed it was the girl they'd seen walking around the site. Hearing this story from my mom really shook me because our family doesn't believe in the paranormal and has never experienced anything like this before. To this day, it gives me chills. Story 13. When I was in high school, one of my closest friends lived next door to a house that seemed cursed. The house was always up for sale, and every family that moved in left in the middle of the night without a word. It hadn't had the same owner for more than 6 months at a time for years. One night, bored out of our minds, my friend suggested we explore the house since it had been sitting empty for a while. We snuck around back and found a dog door. My friend crawled through it, unlocked the door, and let me inside. The house wasn't anything special, just an old craftsman-style home from the 1950s, similar to my friend's house. The kitchen had a built-in breakfast table in front of a large picture window. Even though the electricity was off, the streetlights outside cast just enough light into the room. For some reason, we sat down on the floor across from the table and started talking. Suddenly, my friend screamed, and everything went black for me. It wasn't just that I couldn't see. I was overwhelmed by a freezing, almost sticky cold that covered me from head to toe. I started screaming too, and felt my friend grab my hand and yank me toward the door. My vision slowly returned, and I realized we were outside under a streetlight. It was December, but it was so much colder inside that house than it should have been. I looked at my friend, who was pale and shaking. Confused and panicked, I asked him what had happened. He told me that as I was talking, a black, shadowy figure, vaguely shaped like a girl, crawled out from under the table and sat on top of me. He said my eyes were wide open, but I was blindly groping around as if I couldn't see. He was so terrified that he dragged me out of the house. We're still friends, and we occasionally talk about that night. The story never changes, and it still sends chills down my spine. To this day, I've never experienced anything as cold, dark, or unsettling as I felt in that house. I couldn't walk past it again after that, and even now I feel scared just remembering it. Story 14. Every time I stay at my grandma's house, I hear footsteps upstairs. It starts at one end of the room, casually walks to the other, and stops. This usually happens twice a night. I didn't notice it until I was 14, which was when my grandparents made me start sleeping in a different room on the first floor because they began sleeping in separate bedrooms, both also on the first floor. For some context, I've always been afraid of the upstairs in their house. I don't know why, but it's always freaked me out, and even now, at 23 years old, I refuse to go up there alone. There's one room in particular that's the worst. It's a long, narrow bedroom with closets on either side as you enter, a bed in the middle, and a window at the far end. My grandparents used to tell me that the sons of the previous owners claimed they saw a gorilla come out of the closet at night, dance around the room, and go back into the closet. I didn't think much of it as a kid, but now I sleep in the room directly below it. One night, as I was lying awake in bed, I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, deliberate footsteps starting at one end of the room upstairs. They passed right above me and stopped at the other end of the room. I froze. Terrified, I went to my grandpa's room and told him what I'd heard. He dismissed it, saying the house was old and creaked a lot. Still, he turned on the dining room light to make me feel better. I eventually worked up the courage to go back to bed. Then it started again. This time the footsteps began at the window and walked back across the room, stopping above my door. I thought it was over until 5 seconds later, I heard them coming down the stairs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Silence at the landing. Then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Silence again. Whatever it was now on the first floor. I stared at my doorway, where the dining room light spilled into my room, but I couldn't move. I suddenly heard scratching inside my room, coming from my grandpa's gun case. Long, deliberate scratches, accompanied by the faint sound of the door tapping against the frame. I tried to scream but couldn't. After taking a deep breath, I finally let out a loud scream, and my grandpa came running. I told him everything, but he didn't believe me. That night, I draped a sheet over the side of the bed, crawled underneath, and wrapped myself tightly in a comforter. I didn't want to see or hear anything else. The next morning, my grandma casually mentioned that my cousin once told her the same thing. She came into my room saying, "I hear footsteps." I've stayed at my grandparents' house countless times since, and I always hear the footsteps. I sleep on top of the bed now with headphones on and keep my back to the door. The footsteps haven't come down the stairs again, but if they do, I don't want to know. Story 15. When I was about 7 years old, my two brothers and I were playing in an unofficial motocross area. For some reason, we decided to dig a tunnel, because of course, we were geniuses. After hours of digging, we managed to create a tunnel about 6 feet deep and 2 feet high. I was at the very front, digging away, when suddenly the entire thing collapsed. The tunnel had no supports, just loose dirt, and my world instantly went black. The heat was overwhelming, like being trapped in a furnace. I couldn't move a single muscle under the crushing weight of the soil surrounding me. Panic set in as the darkness turned red, which I think was from the blood being forced into my head. Breathing became harder and harder as the soil tightened around me, and I started inhaling dirt. That made me cough, which caused my stomach to contract, making it nearly impossible to breathe at all. But that wasn't even the scariest part. My young mind was convinced I had died and gone to hell. The pitch-black darkness, the suffocating heat, and the red haze made me believe the worst. It felt like I was buried for an eternity. Suddenly, I felt something grab my foot. My brothers had been frantically digging through the collapse, desperately trying to find me. They finally managed to reach me and pulled me out of the dirt. We didn't tell our parents. I just went home, got hosed down, and tried to act like nothing had happened. Story 16. When we first moved into the house I grew up in, I started hearing someone calling my name from the opposite end of the house. For example, I'd be in my room playing with Legos, and I'd hear my dad calling me from his bedroom. I'd go to my parents' room and ask what they wanted, but they'd always tell me they hadn't called me. At first, I thought they were playing a joke on me because it happened almost every other day. One night, it happened again. I heard my dad calling me, so I went to their room to see what he wanted. But as soon as I stepped inside, I heard my mom's voice calling my name from the living room, all the way on the other side of the house. That's when I knew this wasn't a prank. Both my parents were sitting right in front of me when I heard my mom's voice calling from the living room. I kept this to myself for years, thinking maybe there was a rational explanation. My brother was later diagnosed with partial narcolepsy, and one of the symptoms is auditory hallucinations. I thought maybe I had it too, so I got checked out. But the doctors told me I was perfectly fine. I still have no idea what was calling my name all those years. Even now, when I visit and stay at my childhood home, I occasionally hear it at night. It's something I've never been able to explain. Story 17. This story is 100% true. I'm 23 now, and it happened about 10 years ago when I was around 13 or 14. Back then, I used to skateboard all the time with my friends Tim and Brandon. One day after a long skating session, we decided to stop at 7-Eleven to grab some food and drinks before heading home. Since we were only 13 or 14, we weren't driving. We skated there and planned to skate or walk back home. After buying our drinks, we left the store and walked to the parking lot's exit, waiting for the traffic light to turn red so we could cross the highway. It wasn't a super busy highway since we lived in a small town. While we were waiting, I glanced back at the 7-Eleven gas pumps and noticed a man, probably in his 40s or 50s, pumping gas into his white truck. The man was staring at me, and before I could react, he suddenly dropped the gas pump, jumped into his truck, and sped toward us. He slammed on the gas and came straight at my friends and me. He missed hitting us head on, but he grazed my arm and knocked my skateboard out of my hand. My friend Brandon screamed, "What the F, you D?" as the man peeled out of the parking lot and drove into the lot next to 7-Eleven. What happened next still haunts me. The man drove through a ditch separating the two lots and tried to run us over again. The three of us took off running, full speed, across the highway toward the local library, which was about 2 to 3 blocks from 7-Eleven. We were almost at the library when I looked back and saw the maniac speeding toward us again, his face full of rage. Brandon and Tim ran up to the library doors, but I knew the library was closed because it was Sunday. So, instead of following them, I sprinted toward the woods. There was a trail in the woods that led straight to my backyard, and I thought I'd be safe there. As I ran, I looked back one last time before disappearing into the trees. The man had parked his truck and was jumping out of it, grabbing something from the bed, either a shotgun or a crowbar. I was too far away, and my vision was blurred from panic, so I couldn't tell for sure. I ran as fast as I could all the way home. When I got to my street, my neighbor, who was also Tim's dad, was outside and told me to get in his car. He said we had to go to the video store where Tim's mom worked. When we got there, I found Tim and Brandon with 3 cops. They had run to the video store after realizing the library was closed. My mom was there too, crying her eyes out because they told her they didn't know if I was alive or not. Everyone thought I had been captured. Tim told me something that made my blood run cold. He said he saw the man running into the woods after me. I had assumed the maniac was chasing them, not me. The man was never caught, and for the next 5 years I panicked every time I saw a white truck. To this day, I still get uneasy when I think about what could have happened. Story 18. This didn't happen to me, but to my sister. Growing up, my sister had an imaginary friend. She said her friend was an older lady, very nice, and her name was E.E. My sister would talk to her, play with her, and treat her like a real person. This went on until my sister was about 4 years old, and then it stopped. Fast forward to when my sister was 10. One night, my mom had to rush out to the nursing home because she got a call about my grandpa. My dad went with her, leaving my sister and me alone in the house. At the time, we shared a room, but I was on the other side of the house while she was in our room. Suddenly, I heard the radio in our room turn on by itself, blast at full volume, then turn all the way down and shut off. This happened 3 times in a row. I stormed into the room to tell her to knock it off, but when I got there, she was sitting frozen on the bed, pale as a ghost. I went over to the radio, ready to unplug it, but there was no plug, no batteries. It was the only radio in the house. I turned to her, and she whispered, "It was E.E. I saw her. It was E.E. double quote. Freaked out, I called my mom. She was already upset when she picked up the phone. She told me my grandpa had just passed away. A few days later at the funeral, a relative handed us a picture they had found while cleaning out some old belongings. My sister immediately said, "That's E.E." It was a picture of my grandparents on their wedding day. Here's the kicker. My grandmother died when my mom was only 11, long before my sister or I were born. We had no pictures of her in the house because my step-grandmother had gotten rid of all of them when she moved in. We still don't know how my sister could have described her so perfectly. Story 19. When I was a kid, my family lived in a strange little house. It was incredibly tall and narrow, like a freestanding townhouse with 3 floors, a basement, and an attic. The place was full of quirks, like 2 working fireplaces, a random shower stall in the basement, and a backyard so tiny you couldn't take 5 steps without hitting the fence. My favorite feature was an old rope-pulled dumbwaiter that connected the kitchen to my bedroom. I loved that house, but it was ancient, and the costs of maintaining it eventually became too much for my parents. When I was about 10, we had to move. Packing for the move was a nightmare. I did most of it myself, using the dumbwaiter to send things downstairs and stuffing so many clothes into my closet that they turned into a solid brick of fabric. While clearing out the closet, I noticed something I'd never seen before. A small attic entrance in the ceiling. Curious, I climbed up onto the clothes brick and pulled myself into the attic. The first thing I noticed was that it wasn't as dark as I expected. Red Christmas lights were strung along the ceiling, faintly glowing as if they still had some life left in them. Cracks and holes in the attic floor allowed slivers of light from the rooms below to seep through. The second thing I noticed was that the attic had been set up for someone to live in. The insulation had been covered with plastic. There was an old gurney piled with sleeping bags and sheets, and a rusted mint green refrigerator, which still worked when I tested it. The third thing I noticed was the bones. There were so many bones. They were scattered in piles around the center of the attic. Some were small, others large, all clean and white. I didn't know much about anatomy at the time, but they looked like they came from all kinds of animals. 2 piles were blackened, as if someone had tried to burn them. The walls near the blackened piles were scrawled with dark messages written in what looked like bone char. Most of it was smeared and illegible, but the word "sorry" appeared multiple times. That attic, with its hidden horrors, had been sitting right above my bedroom for the 8 years we lived in that house. Even now as an adult, I still get chills thinking about it. Story 20. When I was 17, I worked with my uncle during the summer and fall, helping him paint houses. He ran a legitimate business, complete with a truck, tools, and everything else. Painting wasn't hard work, and the pay was good, so I didn't mind helping out when he needed extra hands. One particular fall was unusually wet, making it difficult to finish jobs on time. One of those jobs was an old Victorian house in a quiet part of town. The couple who lived there, a polite lady and her husband, who was an author, had been waiting for months for us to finish. The wife called one day explaining that her husband was struggling to write his next book because the scaffolding outside the house was distracting him. My uncle, always dedicated to his clients, made their house a priority. We showed up mid-afternoon on an overcast day. The air was chilly with a dampness that seeped into your bones, and the sky was gray and heavy. The front of the house was already painted, so we headed to the back to finish the job. My uncle asked if I was afraid of heights. Not wanting to seem like a kid, I lied and said I wasn't. Pleased, he handed me the supplies and told me to climb to the third floor to paint the upper section of the house. The area included a small oval window that looked into the attic, which happened to be the husband's study. Climbing the scaffolding with paint cans dangling behind me and tools strapped to my borrowed utility belt, I reached the top and began painting. It felt like any other day, aside from the eerie quiet and the cold. As I worked my way across the house, I reached the attic window and couldn't help but glance inside. There he was, the husband, staring back at me. His face was completely blank, devoid of any emotion. I'd never seen a face like that before, and I haven't since. Startled, I took a step back, but then I chuckled nervously and smiled at him, trying to shake off the unease. He didn't smile back. Instead, he slowly raised a pistol to his head. Without breaking eye contact, he pulled the trigger. I watched, frozen in horror, as he shot himself right in front of me. Blood splattered the window, but his lifeless eyes remained fixed on mine. I gasped, took a step back in shock, and stepped too far. I fell off the scaffolding, plummeting from the third floor. My uncle, alerted by the gunshot, looked up just in time to see me fall. By some miracle, I landed in a bush, escaping with only a broken ankle and some scratches. But the mental scars were far worse. Later, we learned the man had been severely depressed, dealing with marital problems, writer's block, and drinking heavily. The wife moved out of the house not long after, and we never returned to finish the job. To this day, the house remains abandoned, a ghost of its former self. I avoid that street whenever I can. I'm terrified that if I pass by, I'll look up at that window and see him there again, staring at me, emotionless, just as he did that day. Story 21. When I was 13, my grandmother was dying of cancer. During her last few weeks, my mother and I stayed at her house to care for her. She was completely bedridden, so we were with her almost constantly. One night, around 3 a.m., my mom burst into my room and told me something that didn't make sense. She said my grandmother had walked into her room, woken her up, and then left. My mom was concerned, not frightened. She was just worried about how my grandmother, who was literally days away from death and couldn't walk on her own, had managed to get out of bed. We both ran to my grandmother's room, and that's when we found her. She had passed away. At the time, the shock of her death took over, and we didn't stop to think about what had just happened. Months, maybe years later, I asked my mom about that night. I wanted to know what exactly she had seen, but she had no memory of telling me that my grandmother was walking around the house. She didn't even remember what woke her up or why she came to get me. To this day, the memory of that night gives me chills. Writing this now, it still sends shivers down my spine. Story 22. I've shared this before, but it's still one of the most unexplainable things I've ever experienced. When I was younger, my dad and I visited the Manassas battlefield. It was a foggy, misty November day with a slight chill in the air. We parked on top of a hill, sitting on the tailgate of his truck and eating McDonald's while looking at some old cannons. Out of nowhere, we saw a man standing near the cannons, about 50 to 100 meters away. He was dressed in full Civil War attire and waving at us. It wasn't a friendly wave. It was more like a come here wave. My dad had a pair of binoculars, so we got a closer look. The man appeared to be wearing a Confederate uniform and stood completely still, only moving his arm to wave. My dad thought there might be a reenactment happening, and that maybe the man needed help. He decided to walk down to the cannons while I stayed behind, watching through the binoculars. As he got closer, I could see him stop walking and stand still, his posture confused. A few seconds later, he turned around and sprinted back to the truck. He didn't say anything at first, just threw everything into the back of the truck in a hurry and told me we were leaving. Once we were driving away, he finally told me what happened. As he approached the man, the figure slowly disappeared right in front of him. My dad said he felt the strangest sensation in his stomach, like a wave of unease, and got chills all over his body. For context, my dad is not an easy guy to scare. He's a Vietnam combat veteran, and he's faced things most people could never imagine. But this shook him to his core. Even today, when he tells the story, he gets goosebumps. From my perspective, I never saw the man disappear. My dad was standing right next to him when he turned and ran back. I don't know what we saw that day, but I'm convinced it was a ghost. Story 23. About 4 years ago, I had a bizarre experience with time that I still can't explain. It was a day off and I woke up late, around 10:21 a.m. I remember this time clearly because it's tied to everything that followed. I got out of bed, used the restroom, got dressed, and lingered in the warm bathroom for a bit while brushing my teeth. When I went back to my room to check my phone, the clock read 10:25. I thought it was strange because I knew it had taken me longer than 4 minutes to do everything. Assuming I had misread the clock earlier in my groggy state, I shrugged it off. I went downstairs, turned on my PC and the TV, and started cooking breakfast. When I went to microwave some leftovers, I noticed the clock on the microwave also said 10:25. Now I was confused. There was no way all of that had taken less than a minute. I pulled out my phone, and it still said 10:25. Standing in the kitchen, I decided to test the microwave clock. I stared at it while counting to 60. About 20 seconds into my count, the clock changed to 10:26. That made sense since it had been 10:25 for a while before I looked. After finishing breakfast, I sat at my PC, ready to eat and relax. That's when I noticed the time on the PC. 10:20. Confused, I checked my phone again. It also said 10:20. Now I was really freaked out. I pulled up the clock toolbar on the PC and watched the second hand move. As long as I kept my eyes on it, time seemed to pass normally. But when I looked away for even a couple of minutes, the clocks would show times that made no sense. 10:14, 10:13, back to 10:20s and so on. This strange phenomenon lasted for what felt like an hour or an hour and a half. Eventually, all the clocks in the house and on the internet synced back to normal. I've never experienced anything like it since, but I'll never forget how unsettling it was to feel like time itself had broken. Story 24. Last December, just before Christmas, I had a series of near-death experiences in the span of a few days. The first incident happened after my friend and I finished a final exam. We were driving home when I stopped at a red light at a major intersection. I was in the right lane of a 4-lane road, 2 lanes each way, with about 6 cars stopped in front of me. Suddenly, I heard screeching tires and felt a crash. Another car had rear-ended mine on the right side. We got out to exchange information and take pictures. To get a clear shot of the scene, I stepped into the left southbound lane to photograph the angle of the cars and the street signs. My friend called me over to unlock the trunk for some paper. Just as I stepped back into the right lane where my car was, a northbound car drifted into the left southbound lane, where I had just been standing, and missed me by about a foot. The driver had been distracted by our collision and was going about 70 kilometers per hour, 43 miles per hour. 2 days later, my friend and I went paintballing with some other friends. Between games, everyone was in the lobby without masks, and paintball markers, guns, were supposed to be on safety with barrel covers on. I was leaning against a wall when my friend asked for money to buy more paint. I leaned to the side to hand him my wallet. At that moment, a loud splat hit the wall exactly where my head had been. It turned out that a kid across the room had accidentally fired his paintball marker. The barrel cover's retention bungee had snapped, the safety broke, and the marker discharged. If I hadn't leaned over, the paintball, traveling at 250 feet per second, could have hit me in the eye. 2 days after that, we went out drinking with the same group. As usual, I walked ahead of everyone and waited for them to catch up. When we were almost at our destination, I decided to stop and shout back to them instead of walking all the way to the entrance. The moment I stopped, a Porsche came roaring down the street. It crashed into the wall of a building just 10 meters, about 30 feet in front of me, hitting the wall at a right angle. The crash was so violent that the engine compartment caved in, the airbags deployed, and the windows shattered. If I hadn't stopped, I would have been between the car and the building. Finally, on Boxing Day, I had a nightmare. In the dream, I jumped out of a panel van holding a rope and found myself in my driveway. I tied the rope to the front door, knowing that someone was trying to kill me and was tied to the other end. I locked and barricaded every door and window, but the rope was suddenly cut. The house filled with noise, appliances turning on, the TV blasting, the shower running, and I saw a shadowed figure descending the stairs toward me. I woke up screaming, sweating, and muttering, "Slender Man!" I don't know what was going on during that week, but it felt like something was trying to take me out over and over again. Story 25. A friend and I were driving home from high school one afternoon when we stopped at a red light at a major intersection. The left turn light turned green, and my friend accelerated a little too quickly, making his tires peel out slightly. Suddenly, the green pickup truck behind us sped up, pulling up next to us on the left. The driver, a scary-looking bald man, started yelling at us through his closed window. At the next red light, the man pulled up right beside us. He motioned for us to roll down our window, but we tried to decline politely. That's when he made a hand gesture of a gun, pointed it at us, then at his own head and mimed pulling the trigger. We were terrified. Then the man started reaching toward his glove box. The light turned green, and my friend and I shared a look of panic before he floored it. The truck peeled out behind us and began tailing us aggressively. Thinking quickly, I told my friend to head toward my neighborhood. I knew the area well and thought we could lose the truck in one of the cul-de-sacs. We sped into the subdivision and parked behind a car in a crowded driveway, trying to stay out of sight. We laid low in the car, holding our breath. Sure enough, the green truck drove past the street we were hiding on. Huge sigh of relief. Once we felt safe, we called the police and later met with an officer to ensure we could get home without any further incidents. We never saw the man again, and I hope we never do. Story 26. I have a fear of spiders because of something that happened on a hunting trip when I was a kid. I wasn't into hunting. I wasn't an animal rights activist or anything, but I thought killing for sport was wasteful. I brought my Game Boy to keep myself entertained while sitting in a ground blind with a radio to alert the others if I saw any deer. After a while, I got bored of grinding in Pokemon and started rummaging through my backpack for something else to do. That's when I heard a strange whooshing sound nearby. I couldn't see anything at first, so I walked around to investigate. When I came around the back of the blind, I froze. The entire outer wall was covered in a writhing mass of daddy long-legged spiders. My instinct was to run, but I didn't know where camp was. I had been driven out to the blind. Instead, I came up with a brilliant plan. I grabbed a can of off and a lighter from my backpack to blowtorch the spiders off the wall. Big mistake. The second the fire hit the spiders, they let go of the wall. Being downwind, I didn't realize until too late that the flaming, flying spiders were now coming straight at me. I screamed, threw myself to the ground, and rolled around trying to get them off me. I ended up stripping off all my clothes and radioing my dad, demanding that he come get me immediately because we were going home. I've never sworn or cried so much in my life. I eventually went through therapy to deal with the incident. And while I'm no longer paralyzed by fear, I still hate spiders and avoid them whenever possible. Story 27. When I was 16, I worked as a cleaner at my school after class. By the time I left each day, the roads were mostly empty. One day I noticed a man walking behind me. Not too close, but clearly following me. He looked odd, with a face that almost seemed plastic and a subtle, unsettling smile. I brushed it off as coincidence. 2 weeks later, I saw him again. And after that, I started noticing him every single day on my walk home. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want my parents driving me to and from school. It didn't seem cool. One weekend, I was walking to a friend's house along a similar route to my school walk. As I turned onto the main road, I glanced at a parked minibus. My heart stopped. The man was sitting in the driver's seat, staring at me through the window. Panicked, I called my friend and loudly mentioned I was on the phone, hoping it would deter him. But when I turned around again, he was only 2 meters behind me, wearing that same unnerving smile. I started walking faster, almost running, and I could hear his footsteps matching my pace. Still on the phone, I begged my friend to open her door and wait for me. When I got there, I ran inside and we locked the door. The man just stood outside smiling and staring into the window for 2 hours. Eventually he left, and I never saw him again. Years later, I went back to visit my parents. Walking through my old neighborhood, I saw the same minibus parked in the exact same spot. I didn't dare get any closer. Story 28. When I was 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in North Carolina. It wasn't a typical farm with crops. It was a pine tree harvestry. We lived in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly aligned longleaf pines, and every year we'd bale the pine straw for landscaping. Our house had a strange design. The living room had a massive picture window stretching almost 50 feet across. Since the house sat on a small hill, the window was about 6 feet above ground level, giving a view of a mile of pine trees. In winter, the snow reflected the moonlight, which made it easy to see outside at night. I always hated that window. It felt like it exposed too much of the dark woods. One winter weekend, my cousin was visiting, and we decided to build a fort out of couch cushions and blankets in the living room. It was late, and we were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs barking in the distance. This wasn't unusual. The property was vast, and the dogs often chased animals off the land. As we sat there, my cousin started staring out the window. When I asked him what he saw, he just shushed me. After a few minutes, he whispered that he thought he saw something. I turned to look, and we both saw it, a shadowy figure moving briskly from one tree to another about 100 yards away. At first, we thought we might have imagined it, but a few minutes later, another figure appeared, this time about 50 feet from where the first one was. The figures didn't run. They just walked briskly between trees, disappearing into the shadows. This went on for about half an hour. We didn't wake my dad because we knew he'd just grab his rifle and yell into the woods. We were too scared to do anything but keep watching. Finally, one of the figures appeared and started running toward the house. We panicked and ran to wake up my dad. By the time he came into the living room, the figure was gone. We locked all the doors and windows, something we rarely did out in the country, and convinced him to sleep in the living room with us. The next morning, we went outside to investigate. There were footprints everywhere in the snow, between trees, circling the house, and right up to the window. What terrified me most was realizing that someone had been standing directly beneath the living room window, completely hidden from our view. Story 29. A few years ago, a small plane crashed in a neighboring town. As a member of the county's volunteer search and rescue team, I was called to assist in the recovery effort. We learned from the sheriff that the crash involved an elderly couple and their young granddaughter. When he told us, the entire group fell silent. You could see the light drain from everyone's faces. When we arrived at the crash site, it was clear there were no survivors. The wreckage was catastrophic. Our team lead gave us an out, saying anyone uncomfortable with recovering the bodies could step away without judgment. About half the group stayed back, helping with radio calls and setting up ropes for the steep terrain. The first thing I saw was a small teddy bear, soaked in blood. My stomach dropped, and the air seemed heavier around us. As we descended further, we found the bodies. The little girl was the first one I saw. Her lifeless eyes stared out, and I felt completely numb. She would never grow up, never experience the joy, pain, and complexity of life. I've seen a lot in my time as an EMT, drug overdoses, car crashes, suicides. But this broke something inside me. Seeing that child surrounded by the wreckage of her life stayed with me for a long time. Nobody should have to do what we did that day. Nobody should have to put a child in a body bag, but someone has to do it. If I don't, someone else will have to bear the weight of that memory, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Story 30. My grandfather's company, which operates in timber and mining, was setting up an office in a remote part of a third world country. They found a house for dirt cheap, even by local standards. Naturally, there was a catch. The villagers warned him not to buy the house because it was haunted, claiming that everyone who had ever lived there had died violently. My grandfather dismissed it as superstitious nonsense and bought it anyway. The plan was for the office to occupy the ground floor of the house, while the man in charge of setting it up would live on the top floor with his wife and 3 kids. The man moved in with his family, and for a while everything seemed fine. Then my grandfather stopped hearing from him. Since it was a remote area with unreliable power and communication, he wasn't immediately concerned. But as weeks passed with no word, he finally contacted the local police and asked them to check in on the man. What they found was horrific. The entire family was dead. The man had killed his wife and children before turning the machete on himself. Yes, a machete. Not a gun. Not something quick or painless. He hacked them all to death, and then somehow hacked himself to death as well. The scene was beyond gruesome. The police reported that blood covered the walls, even the ceiling. Villagers began spreading rumors that the spirits had thrown the bodies around, which explained the blood on the ceiling. My grandfather tried to reason with them, explaining how blood pressure and physics could account for the splatter. But the locals just gave him strange looks. One chilling detail was how the man barricaded the door with the family's massive old wooden bed, a piece of furniture so heavy that it would normally take several people to move it. The villagers claimed this was proof of spirit possession, while my grandfather chalked it up to adrenaline-fueled insanity. The aftermath was a logistical and moral nightmare. My grandfather had to pay bribes to ensure the story didn't reach the press. He even managed to get the police to classify the deaths as natural, which sounds absurd, but in a remote area of a third world country, bribes can smooth over anything. Everyone involved was forced to sign NDAs to prevent the story from spreading further. My grandfather still needed someone to set up the office, but no one was willing to volunteer. Even though most employees didn't know the full extent of what had happened due to the gag order, everyone knew the previous man and his family had died. Desperate, my grandfather promoted one employee, giving him a fancy title and assigning him to take over the job. The man quit on the spot. To this day, the house remains empty, and the office was never established. Whether it was spirits, isolation-induced madness, or something else entirely, the events surrounding that house are something my family won't forget. Story 31. This story isn't about ghosts or the supernatural, but it's about the most terrified I've ever been. Last year, a close friend of mine, Charlie, passed away. He was in the army with me and had survived a bad injury in Iraq. He took frag to the leg but pulled through. His death came out of nowhere, and while I won't go into the personal details, it hit my other friend Bill especially hard. Bill is one of those rare people who lights up every room. He's confident, kind, and genuinely cares about others. He's the best friend I've ever had, no question. When Charlie's family flew into town for a memorial, a group of us decided to gather and remember him. I was 20 at the time, so I couldn't drink and ended up being the designated driver. Bill, on the other hand, hit the bottle hard. He was doing shots with everyone, downing pitchers and drinking like he was trying to drown something. As the night wore on, Bill grew quieter and more serious. Around 1 a.m., he asked me to step outside while he smoked. He sat on a concrete block in the parking lot, staring at the ground. After a long silence, he said the scariest thing I've ever heard. "After I go home tonight, I'm going to kill myself." Panic set in. I tried everything to talk him down, begging, crying, even hitting him in the face to snap him out of it. He started breaking down, saying how much he hated himself. It was chaos. At one point, my squad leader came over, and for the first time ever, I told him to F off. Eventually, other friends came to help. After hours of talking, Bill started to open up. I could still see the pain in his eyes, but it felt like we'd pulled him back from the edge. I drove him back to the barracks, terrified he'd still try something. When we got to his room, I pushed him into his closet and locked him in. Then I slept against the closet door the entire night to make sure he couldn't get out. The next morning, Bill asked me why he woke up in the closet. I told him everything and made it clear he wasn't touching alcohol for a very long time. Looking back, I've realized that the deepest fear isn't for your own life. It's for the lives of the people you care about. Story 32. This isn't my story, but one of my former teachers told it to me, and she swears it's true. When she was a child, she shared a bedroom with her younger sister. One night, her sister told her to look at the doorway. She looked up and saw the silhouette of a man standing there, completely still. She had a light switch next to her bed, so she quickly turned it on. The moment the room lit up, the figure was gone. Terrified, they called their dad, who came in and asked what was wrong. They told him about the man in the doorway, but he said it was probably just their eyes playing tricks on them. The next morning, my teacher went downstairs and found her father sitting at the kitchen table, staring off into space. When she asked him what was wrong, he asked her a question instead. "Was the man you saw tall?" Over the years, every member of their family saw the silhouette of the tall man at least once. Each time, the same thing happened. They'd see him standing in the doorway, but when they turned on the light, he'd vanish. Even now, I get chills thinking about this story. It's haunted me ever since she told it to me.